Welcome to Untethered to Rooted, a podcast that brings you a collection of stories around grief, healing, and identity. Hear from everyday people how grief and loss shape their identity and how their identity shapes the way they heal and process grief. I'm your host, Dana Daugherty, a licensed psychotherapist with extensive experience dealing with grief, both personally and professionally. And if you want to hear stories with gems and practical tools for healing, stay tuned for more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Today, we'll be exploring the intergenerational impacts of grief and clergy's response to grief when it comes up in their congregations. In past episodes, we have discussed intergenerational grief and trauma passed down within families, so you might already be familiar with this. And we know that grief and how it is experienced can be passed down from one generation to the next, especially if that grief is never addressed. The outcome of this is different in each generation, but we see it come out as difficulty in expressing emotions, taking on others' emotions, and even codependency, if you're familiar with that term, substance use, and miscommunication and unspoken expectations. Our guest today, Reverend Angela Farrar Small, has personally and professionally experienced the intergenerational impact of grief, was a Black woman pastor of a predominantly elderly white congregation in the Pacific Northwest. And while there, she discovered differences and similarities amongst faith communities and cultural approaches to grief and people who are grieving. So she'll share more about that today. And by way of introduction, I'm going to read Angela's bio. Angela has extensive knowledge and experience with grief and loss, personally and professionally. She has worked in hospice, in HIV disease care, and counseling individuals living with chronic conditions and their caregivers, including families impacted by dementia. Angela also served as the pastor of a small congregation of elders, and as such, sat at many hospital bedsides and ministered to many in grief. Personally, Angela has grieved for the sudden deaths of her father, a friend for whom she has the power of attorney and caregiver, and her husband. Those lived experiences of grief deepened her perspective on how one lives through grief and makes meaning from the pain. Angela has many different degrees, social worker, a licensed clinical social worker, an MDiv, and an MS. And you can follow Angela's work and her contact on the website www.eastsidetherapyassociates.com. Angela is newly focused on pivoting to spiritual care and spiritual trauma healing as it connects to mental health. And so welcome, Angela. I'd love to invite you to kind of position yourself today. And I'd love to just have you share what are some identities that are important to you.
So I was born on the East Coast. I am a Black woman. I am a woman who relocated a couple decades ago to the Pacific Northwest. I am from a military family, so I was a military kid. I like to correct people and say I wasn't a military brat, was not allowed to be a brat. My lieutenant colonel mother was not having a brat. So I was a military kid. Moved around the country, got to see a lot of different communities that way. I am a straight cis Black woman who also has made herself into an ally for the LGBTQ plus community, including in my clergy days, advocating for marriage equality. As a clergy person who signs, marriage certificates, I thought this isn't right that I don't get to sign certificates for everybody who wants to marry. So it was really important to me to take that clergy role into advocacy with legislators and educate them about ways of seeing faith community as allies and supporters of LGBTQ rights. So that's been important to me as well as the clergy, and to hold the clergy identity in a certain way, in a certain positionality to not cause harm to our siblings.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing about yourself. And I'd love for you to, that really helps us in sort of like socially and locating you and understanding where you're coming from a little bit. I'm wondering also about your connection with this topic today about intergenerational impact of grief and clergy and how they respond to grief. Yeah, what's your connection to that today?
I come from a family that did not process their loss very well, and there were many of them. So my grandmother lost 3 of her children before they were adults. So 2 teenagers drowned on one day, and another child of hers drowned at the same location where the others had drowned.
Wow.
So that is, I can't even imagine that kind of pain of being a mom and losing your children, several of them. They did not talk about that. They just kept on keeping on, they just kept on moving forward. And they didn't have as much family support as would have been good, or faith community support, or any kind of support as would have been good. My grandmother was a single mom, and she just relocated her family. Another really pivotal loss is that her only daughter, she died in childbirth. So imagine you have 5 children and you've lost 4 of them. Imagine that. But did they
Trauma.
talk about that trauma? No. Did they actively work with that trauma? No, not very well. It was just a matter of surviving and continuing on. Unfortunately, my dad, who was the one surviving child, did not get what he needed. So unfortunately, he turned to substances and turned away from the faith of the family. So that was his response, was to numb himself, to pretend to be okay when he wasn't, to have his rage at home. But of course, as a Black man, had to hold it together out in the world. He couldn't be an angry Black man out in the world, but at home, he could show all the range of his pain and anger. And we all lived with that.
What was
So,
that like? Like, what
oh,
was that like for you to witness this? And did you make that immediate connection with grief, or did you make that connection with grief later? Like,
I made that connection with grief later. I just knew that people were around me were hurting, and I had to be a very good child. I had to be an exceedingly good child. And I had to keep the secret of how bad things were at home from the world. So this was not something I remember ever being told. I know lots of Black people have been told, like, you don't tell your business out in the streets, you don't tell your business out in the world. I don't remember those words, but I remember the sentiment. I remember being told very young that I looked like my Aunt Irma, who died in childbirth, and that she was so sweet, she was so nice, like she was so all the goods, and I look like her.
wow.
It's
Well,
kind of spooky how much I look like her. Having a picture of her, and other people look at that picture and go, that looks like you. Oh my gosh. I was like, it's not me. That's my aunt. And she died very young. And so from a very early age, that piece of the grief I knew was, you look like this daughter that I had from my grandmother's perspective. You look like this daughter I have that died. So she attached to me very quickly and very deeply. I
mm,
was the replacement baby is my phrase for that. I was the replacement baby. I was the
yeah.
one who had to be good and keep the secrets about how much pain there was at home, and take care of the emotions of the adults in my behavior. Those were unspoken but very clear expectations. And I didn't want to disappoint the adults around me anyway, so it was just part of my nature anyway to comply with that. But also, to know that you look like this person that we loved and lost. You look like her. It was sort of like, well, now I have to embody that. I have to make up for that. I have to be the new version of that.
Whoa.
Again, these were not words anyone said to me. This was just a sense I got. It was just a sense I got as a very small child. So at 4, I was keeping the family secrets. At about 7 or 8, I knew, oh, I look like this aunt and everyone misses her terribly. I have to be, I have to be something. I have to be something. I have to be a certain kind of somebody for this family.
Wow. Wow. Even just as you're describing it, I'm like, the intergenerational impact of just your behavior is shaped by this loss before
Mm-hmm.
you, the family
Mm-hmm.
loss, and the family's grief around the
Mm-hmm.
loss of your aunt,
Mm-hmm.
and how really, like, what comes to mind actually, as both of us are therapists, is like the fostering of this sort of fawn response, actually,
Mm-hmm.
like for
Yes.
you as a kid,
Yes.
of like
Mm-hmm.
having to people please or be like
Mm-hmm.
the good child, or at
Mm-hmm.
least have good behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm wondering, like, embodying that and seeing that as a child, as you were like 7 and then like
Mm-hmm.
12, like, did you ever feel like that was something you wanted to continue on, or did you recognize that that was happening at the time, or did you ever want to rebel against that? I'm curious about just like all of that pressure being put upon and like where did it go?
Well, I mostly just, as I said, kind of complied with the expectation, but I did wish that I could have my own opinions, thoughts, and feelings, because it was also like, it was clear, like, I don't have much of a poker face. Okay. When I was upset, I was upset. It was clear.
Yeah.
I cried. My face changed when I was mad. But my family's message was don't. So I wished I could have my feelings. I wished I could have my voice. I was not encouraged to have a voice. It was sort of like the adults are too overwhelmed. The adults are too overwhelmed with survival and with their grief. You can't. I was like, it's funny, even my throat closed up then. Like,
Yeah.
you can't speak
Heard that.
up. You
Wow.
can't speak up. It's not okay to speak up. People can't handle you speaking up. Your feelings, unless they are the yes, ma'am, yes, sir, yes, I will kinds of responses, were not okay. I wished by the time I was 10, I was really feeling the pain and my own anger about not being able to have my voice and to not have my feelings.
Mm.
That was,
Yeah.
but it was still like, nope, you gotta just obey.
Wow.
And so, but I was just very aware around that age of like, this part isn't fair. I should at least be able to have my thoughts and feelings at home. I should at least be able to tell the adults in my life what I think and feel, and that they care about that. It was a sense of, again, of just too much overwhelm with other trauma, the traumas of death, the traumas of abuse, the traumas of addiction, and the codependency around the addiction also. All of that was like the adults have too much. So I might want my voice, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to be allowed to have it.
Mm.
So part of this story, which we'll come back to, is that I journaled. I was given a journal as a child. I'm still a journaler. It was one of the ways I coped with
Amazing.
not having a voice.
Yeah.
But I had
Yeah.
big feelings. I had big feelings that I was like, yeah, later on, I'm like, yeah, I was entitled to those big feelings. I just wasn't allowed to show them or express them. I
Yeah.
had my journal.
Wow. I was going to ask you, and I still will, is just, I'm curious what spaces allowed you to then be able to have more of a voice, because it sounds like you had to create your own space to have a voice, and maybe there was the opportunity for
Mm-hmm.
you to have that
Mm-hmm.
space if that
Mm-hmm.
journal was given to you. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm wondering, journaling, like what
Mm-hmm.
what were those spaces and what did those spaces provide you? Yeah.
Those spaces were with friends, and those spaces were in my journal. Those are the places where I could have my thoughts and feelings as they really were, and not have to censor myself, and to grow into my own emotional awareness. Gosh, therapy? No.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we moved around as a military family. First, for my mother's nursing jobs, my mother and father separated when I was young, and then divorced. So we moved around because of my mother's nursing jobs, and then because of the military. So some local community just kept changing. And so I didn't have, like other relatives had church. I didn't have that. We just kept moving around, but I got really good at, for good or for ill, I got really good at like adapting to new environments, as many military kids do, as many kids who've had to move around for economic reasons do. You get really good at like, okay, new environment, new rules, I'll figure it out. But fortunately, I was also able to make friends, and those were safe people for me at a time
Yeah.
when I couldn't share my feelings at home, because it was just like, change your face, don't say that, stop that right now. But there was serious things happening at home that, like, oh, I know I can't talk about this just randomly. So those were the places and those were the spaces. I knew that my grandmother, this grandmother that had lost 4 of her 5 children, was coping through her faith. She was playing gospel records at home. She loved Al Green and always loved Al Green. And when he went gospel, so did she. So, and so
Yeah.
faith was a way of coping too, but it was still unfortunately very solitary because of some other shame that she was experiencing, not talking about very well. I am really appreciative that she loved me well. Again, I looked like the daughter she lost. So she put a lot of love into me, but she also put faith into me. I asked her for my first Bible. I was
Mm.
10 and I knew I wanted a grown-up Bible, and she knew it too. So she got me a grown-up Bible. She did not give me a children's Bible because I wasn't messing with that.
Yeah.
I wasn't having that. She knew it. And so
Wow.
part of her grief response was unfortunately a solitary faith. She didn't have so much community around her, but she had faith and she imparted it to me. And so when I didn't have, a faith community of church, I had her. And I had my grandmother, my other grandmother, and my other grandparents, they had faith too. And so for a while we were going to church. But then the military relocated us and we weren't going to church. So that all changed. We were separated from my family when I was 13 years old by the military. That was when my mother signed up and became an officer in the United States Air Force. And
Wow.
so that was so there. It had already been happening, all this adaptation, but then it happened on a new level because we relocated across the country. But I had been given a sense that God cares, even when the people don't. I'd been given a sense that God might care.
Yeah, yeah. That's really significant because, everything you're saying about just moving around as a military kid. I was a military kid, but I did move around a lot as a corporate kid for business reasons and just moving around every like 5-ish years. Really with everything changing so much, needing constants in
Mhm,
like my life. I'm curious for
mhm,
you, it sounds like faith was maybe a constant, even though your communities were changing. And,
mhm, mhm,
I was noting that,
mhm,
yeah, there's like intergenerational grief, but there's also
mhm,
intergeneration, maybe, I don't want to speak for you, but
mhm,
intergenerational healing or a
mhm,
path or possibility for healing with
mhm.
your grandmother imparting just like faith and faith
Yes.
communities to
Right.
you as well. And so I'm
Mhm,
curious how those things have sort of like intersected at the point of like what was a constant when everything was
mhm,
sort of changing because grief is also change,
mhm,
so
mhm.
when everything was changing so much. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My own personal faith was a constant. My own
Mm.
personal faith was a constant. And I held it in a very personal way too, in some sense, in that I would go to church and I would hear things, and the adults were saying things and the pastor would say things, and some of which I was like, yes, and some of which even in my youth was like, nope, don't agree. And I just kept it to myself that I didn't agree with everything I was hearing, particularly, messages that were not inclusive of all of our siblings in the LGBTQ community. I never accepted that. I was always
Mm.
against that. But I just kept it to myself. I was like, that's not the God that I talk with and pray to. I understand
Mm.
God to be different than what I'm hearing, but okay, you do you, because I guess it's working for you, but it's not going to work for me. So my own personal faith was a constant. My mother was a constant, even though, yes, she was one of those folks who was like, oh, please don't tell me your big feelings because I can't handle it. But she was a constant still in her own way, too. I was being given more voice as I grew. So as a teenager, I was beginning to be given a little more voice. And she was experimenting with having different kinds of conversations with me. So my dad was a constant in his own way, too, on the phone now because I had left New Jersey, but he was a
Wow.
constant in his own way, too. And my grandmother, and my grandmother.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. And your journal that you
and
mentioned
my
was also
journal,
your
which,
journal.
after the first one got filled up, then I just kept replacing them and still do that to this day. hmm
Wow.
Still do that
Wow.
to this day. hmm
Yeah, yeah. So faith, your journal, different family members, and also the ability, I think there's this like ability to be able to make friends. You said that you
hmm
sort of were like making friends in community wherever you were.
hmm
So that
hmm
also is not always easy for people to
No.
do. So yeah, I wonder if that also influenced maybe how you were healing.
hmm hmm Well, what was really good too is that where I had been kind of a shy kid, I made one of the things I consciously did was with one of those moves in middle school, I was like, these people don't know who I am. I'm going to sign up for drama class. I signed up for drama class
Amazing.
and participated in school musicals and plays. It was a way to meet people. It was a way to learn how to interact, and a way to just take on new ways of communicating and expressing myself. It was also where I encountered the first kids who were back then in the closet, but known by those of us close to them, known to be gay. Was where I first encountered some of my gay friends and cared deeply for them and their experience, and was sad that they were at the time having to closet. It's a new day, and I'm glad for that. But back then, that's how it was that kids were gay in the closet. But within our little drama community, within our little theater club, they could be a little more themselves.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I actually hear maybe a parallel, and I wonder if that was true for you of like your family culture was that you couldn't really share your family business out there and sort of that was
Mm-hmm.
closeted as well, like you're
Mm-hmm.
around
Mm-hmm.
grief. And so I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if also just being around friends who were experiencing something similar was also just a connecting point
Mm-hmm.
for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a connecting point in terms of like you have a secret, and I had a bunch of family secrets, and
Mm.
knowing that it wasn't okay to keep any of those secrets, we could have each other and tell some truths to each other.
Huh. Wow. So kind of a new way of being,
Hmm.
a new way of
A new way
interacting
of
and
interacting and
communicating.
communicating, and coming to terms with that fact of like, yeah, this grief has been imparted to me in unhealthy ways, but also in love from my grandmother, that I, was given the same appearance of her daughter that she loved. And so I had, that was a piece that I was able to more and more kind of understand, of like, that was part of our bond. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was just known. I look like her.
Mhm.
People just kept saying, I look like her. I look like her. So yeah, I
Mm.
look like Irma. So she loves me. And in a way, it's because I know she loved Irma and didn't get to complete that. And now she gets to kind of restart it through me. And kind of, she was having her own, as I said, her own relationship to God, that on one side, the platitudes that I'm sure she got, because I certainly heard them in church. I certainly heard, I certainly heard them offered in faith communities around the death and dying, even of children, the platitudes. But she didn't give me platitudes. She just gave me like, and God still loves us and cares. It ain't
Mm.
easy, but here
Yeah.
we are.
Can you like be specific about like what sort of platitudes have you heard maybe in faith communities? And then maybe what was the difference of like just being real with it versus the
Hmm.
platitudes around
Hmm.
grief?
Hmm. Hmm. So one of the big ones is must have been God's will,
Mm,
which is no comfort at all to the grieving. No
mm,
comfort at all to the grieving to hear that this must have been God's will. And so you should just accept it. Oh, so that is a diminishment of my experience and
mm,
my loss. But that was a platitude I heard in faith communities, both white and black communities, was like God's will.
mm,
And the platitudes about God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Well, in the moment of grieving, I don't want to handle this. I don't know that I can handle it. Moment to moment, I didn't know I could handle. As I was experiencing my own painful losses, I didn't always know that I could handle it. And I was
Good
mad at
point.
God. Like my father was mad at God. He was the one who was like, I'm an atheist because God took my family members, and where's a God of love? I was like, yeah, I understand that reaction, and the platitudes were not helping. The platitudes just left me in pain and isolated. All of the stuff, even around like they're in a better place. I'm like, but I want them with me, right? I'm not
Mm,
done. I'm not
mhm,
done experiencing this relationship.
mhm.
Fortunately, I learned that was the way, is to keep having the relationship. Fortunately, I
Mm,
learned that.
yeah,
The way
yeah.
was to keep having the relationship. It was just remade. It was just remade.
Mhm.
But I was so angry hearing sometimes, they're in a better place. Like, that's not helping. That's
Yeah.
again, that's not helping me with my actual reality. Again, kind of putting a wedge between my pain and God,
Mhm.
that I didn't want or need to be there. I needed God with me. I needed a sense that divine love was still with me, that God cared about my pain and my losses. And so to tell me this is God's will to put you in this pain kind of divested me from what I needed was God's presence. And that despite what I was going through, that there was a divine presence that could be available to me in a caring way. And even if I didn't understand up here, that I could maybe feel it down here, maybe. So I prayed through a lot of grief. I screamed and cried and complained to God in my journal, in my prayers, later in certain faith communities where I could have it more openly. As a pastor, though, I couldn't have it. As a pastor, I was not allowed to have. I mean, I was expected, again, elderly congregation, so many losses in that church. And it was still to be there for them. So when my father died, I was a pastor and so my father died very suddenly from the cancer. It had been diagnosed, was starting treatment, and then he died very suddenly from his cancer. So I'm going to stop here because it was so immensely painful for this group of people who said they loved me and cared about me as their pastor, couldn't be there for me in my grief. I couldn't talk about being a Black woman in that congregation either. So I was not expected to talk about my culture and my traditions. I wasn't expected to have my grief at the time that I was feeling it most acutely. So I had to come back, bury my dad, come back very quickly, and then deal with a church controversy or two. Like there were a couple church controversies that came up in the congregation, and I had to deal with that. I couldn't deal with my grief.
Wow.
So they would say, we love you, we care about you, but at a time that I needed to feel it, to experience it through them, I wasn't.
Yeah, some people might say that seems very like antithetical to like the faith
Christian
community.
community. Yeah, but no, the role of pastor, there's so much pressure for you to be there for others. There is all the perfectionism. And if you are depressed, if you are grieving, you're just not trusting God. You just need to pray harder. Your feeling depressed is a sign that you are not doing your faith right. And so you just get right with the Lord on that, child.
More messages, but in adulthood.
Yes. And from a role of a familiar role for me of caring for others, a familiar role of caring about others' feelings. But at a time that I was really struggling, I wasn't allowed to really, really pause and have it. So I came up with this shorthand with my congregation because I wasn't going to completely deny my feelings, but I knew it had to be a shorthand because it was still like I still have that board meeting to go to. I still have that budget meeting to go to. I still have to sit at the bedside for somebody else. So I came up with a shorthand. And so my shorthand was, in grief, I can feel three ways: mad, sad, or numb. Today I'm feeling, and I would say, numb. I can be mad, sad, or numb. I'm grieving, but today I'm mad. So just be aware. It's my grief, but I'm mad about it today. And so I just had that shorthand. So when people would say, how are you feeling? I had that shorthand and say, today I'm mad. Today I'm numb. Today I'm sad, deeply sad. But I'm still here for you. I'm still here for you. I'm still here for you. It wasn't working completely. And so I did, about 5 months after my father's death, I took a couple months off from the ministry.
I was going to ask.
There was a lay leader who was able to see that I needed that and advocated with the other church leadership that I have a couple months sabbatical. Because I was tired from my grieving. I was tired from all the trips to the hospital. Another grief piece, it feels really important for me to share this too, is that a grandparent in my church, okay, so here we go, an echo of my family's childhood story, that a grandparent in my church, her granddaughter was battling leukemia for the second time. And she was 7 years old when she died of leukemia. I was her pastor. I preached I gave the eulogy at that child's funeral. And I was just struck with how quickly this predominantly white congregation was like, well, they should just be moving on. Like, it's a 7-year-old 7-year-old girl.
Whoa.
We prayed very fervently for her to be healed. She wasn't cured of her leukemia. She died. I
Mhm.
was there in that hospital room with the family praying this child from life to death. I was literally saying words of prayer as this child went from life to death. And a year later, the family had a celebration for her, a celebration of like, we love her, her legacy. So a year after her death, they had a party, and the congregation thought it was weird. I didn't think it was weird. I thought it was what they needed and just right in their grief. And I think a piece of that was a little piece of the family history piece and the cultural piece of like, they're doing what they need to do to have their grief and to honor their loved one. You don't get to judge it. You don't get to judge. But they were like, are they going to do this every year? Are they going to have this every year? I said, I don't know. It's up to them what they need.
Wow. It's ironic just because there's like in the Christian faith, there's like communion and doing that in
In
remembrance
remembrance of.
of
Mm-hmm.
weekly sometimes,
Yes.
sometimes monthly,
Yes.
but like
Well,
it's just
it's okay to remember Jesus and his sacrifice on the regular basis, but not to have the same kind of remembrance for our loved ones, because it's, again, are we not trusting God enough if we're still in our emotional pain of grief?
wow. It's a very like either or kind of. I think like the question I have around that is, and maybe it's around the platitudes and around the same thing around
Mm-hmm.
why don't you just move on?
Mm-hmm.
Is like what do you think is going on with people who might say these things? Do you think they're like well intentioned? Do you think they're not well intentioned? Do you think they're just don't like are they uncomfortable with their grief in the same way as you mentioned your previous generations not like not talking about it? Like
Mm-hmm.
what's going on for people?
Yeah, yeah. I believe that people are just uncomfortable. They don't know what to say to the grieving. They don't know what to say when someone has died. They worry about the words. And so there's just a discomfort culturally. Again, wider community culture around grief and death. And so people don't know what to say, and people are afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I get it that they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, but then they just disappear, or they just say things that give a message of you're supposed to move on. And then the faith community's version of is like, well, they're in a better place and it was God's plan and God's will, so you're not supposed to grieve it.
Yeah,
Sorry, we're grieving
yeah.
this. And I was really firm about, because I'd been a clinical social worker with people who died of AIDS and other chronic illnesses in my previous career before being a pastor, I refused to say, including with the death of this child from leukemia, I refused to say I knew what God was up to. I refused to say that. I was just like, no, I'm going to be the person who says, I don't know what God is doing here. I will never be able to explain in a way that is satisfactory the death of a 7-year-old from leukemia. I'm not gonna step into that waters. I'm not gonna pretend to know more than I know. I'm not going to pretend to know more than I know. I'm not going to give you a platitude. I'm going to say, I don't know what God is up to. I know it's terrifically painful. We prayed as a community for this child to be cured. She wasn't, but I still trust that God might still be here for us okay, that little girl I preached at, excuse me, again, I guess I say I preached at, I gave the eulogy
Mhm.
at her funeral. There were 700 people there.
Wow. Wow.
700. Some of them were the staff of the children's hospital. This kid had an impact. This child had an impact. That I could say for sure. I don't know what God is doing by her dying. I still have some things from her remembrance with me in my living room right now.
Mhm.
She's with me. That those lessons are with me through remembering her, through the little ceramic piece that I have that her friends and family created as a response to their loss. I still have it here. What I do know is not to give people platitudes. What I know is to give people like, you're grieving and it hurts and I know it's real. And you
Yeah.
don't have to rush through it, and you don't have to pretend with me
Yeah.
to be
Acknowledgement.
okay.
It's like acknowledgement of
Mm-hmm.
pain
Mm-hmm.
and witnessing
Mm-hmm.
pain and just
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
that support coming through,
Mm-hmm.
not saying something else to like, again, hide away secret, hide things in a closet, hide things away in secret, or I'm uncomfortable, so like, don't talk too much about this. It's more
Mm-hmm.
like, actually, I see that you're in pain.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm witnessing
I'm
this. That's what
witnessing
I'm
this.
hearing.
And
Hmm.
even though I am a minister, I'm not going to give you those lines that are supposed to just paint it over, because that's more for me than for you. So I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting at the bedsides of people, including a 4-year-old, but also many adults who died of AIDS, it was still like, this isn't God's judgment. This is a response that we as a humans should be taking care of one another and taking care of this as a medical issue, not a judgment issue. This is not God's punishment. This is a virus. We need to be fighting it as a community. We need to be fighting it in the world and making people have the treatments that they need. This is not a judgment of God. There were places where I could weave in, like, so don't judge this family for still grieving. God didn't punish them by taking this child. It's something that happened. It's something that
Yeah.
happened. And God cares about their grief. God cares about their pain and their loss. Any God that, I'll say it this way, a little salty here, but any God, but any God that doesn't care about your grief and your pain, is that God worth worshiping?
Mm.
Is that God worth
Whoa.
my worship? If they
Whoa.
if they if they are more about judging people for being sick
Mm.
than being present to our pain, and then making that pain into hopefully treatments to take care of these illnesses,
Mm.
to change a society, to take our pain and change society around the health disparities of people of color and the poor. Can we take that
Mm.
pain and make it into a mobilization? But that's not something to do right away. First, you just got to feel. You just got to feel what you're
Mm.
feeling. And you're going to
Mhm.
be mad, sad, and numb.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then there are opportunities. I'm hearing there's so many opportunities to meet people where they're at in their pain.
Yeah.
And there's so many opportunities, even out of these horrible things that happen, for
Mm-hmm.
community to come together, to care
Mm-hmm.
for each other. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I imagine that that has probably influenced your healing
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of different ways. I hear it
Mm-hmm.
like in your adolescence, of like in high school, actually having opportunities for people to meet you where you're at and be
Mm-hmm.
able to speak about like grief. But
Mm-hmm.
then also later on, as you know, a pastor, there are opportunities for people seeing
Mm-hmm.
people who either who really didn't meet people in their grief.
Right.
And so I'm all, the question that's coming up for me is, I'm wondering, um, what were some things that you would have liked to see in terms of like opportunities for people to take steps towards healing
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
meeting people in their grief?
Right, right. Well, one of the things that I did as a pastor that I still think could be done more, but again, pastors are made to be perfect and overwhelmed with all the multiple roles they're serving. So all kinds of understanding, having been in the role, that there's too much to the role, and then also the kind of the scrutiny around it. But one of the things that communities can do, and that I saw and did as a pastor in a faith community, was that I did what's called a Blue Christmas service, because the Christmas holidays, all of the like happiest time of the year, but we're still feeling the pain of our losses. And so we recognize who's not at the holiday table. And so I did a Blue Christmas service using music and scriptures for people to acknowledge that they were grieving during the holidays.
Wow. Creative.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so I
Great
created a
idea.
community ritual. It's not a totally new idea to me. It was something that I had learned about, and I was like, "This is what our community needs." I invited not just my congregation. I invited the wider community to come, because there are lots of people hurting during the holidays and expected to just like still make it a happy holiday, and they're again in a place of loss and grief, and also the holidays and all the people that are missing and that you're not celebrating with. And so I did a Blue holiday service. I also kind of insisted on saying the names. I was like, let's say the names. Let's say
Yeah.
the names of the people you've lost. Let's say them out loud. Now, again, not every culture is okay with that, I recognize, but I felt like it was really important to keep saying the name, to say it, because then the loss can be more real for the rest of us if they're
Mhm.
allowed to say the name and remember out loud the
Mhm.
people who have died. So not to make it a secret that you're grieving, but like, oh, I really miss my uncle so and so. I really
Yeah.
miss so and so right now. It's their birthday, and I'd say, what's their name? Oh, and I'd encourage them to talk about it. I also know that people often need an object. So if there's an
Mhm.
object of remembrance to, I created photo albums and I created little collections of things that were important or remembered, help me to remember my loved one. So yeah,
Mm.
birthday of my dad and my grandmother this weekend, I was talking to him. I was
Yeah.
like, happy birthday. Happy birthday. I remember you. I love you. And I was, talking about like their grief and then also how it impacted me and how I am trying to do better in terms of opening it up so that people aren't suffering all by themselves. The way I saw my
Mhm.
family members suffer by themselves and often take substances, drink in their
Yeah.
case. Yeah,
Yeah.
because if they could have
Amazing.
shared it, it might have at least felt like something that they could bear a little easier to not be alone in it.
Yeah.
There's so
Yeah.
many messages. Again, there's Christian messages around basically like, buck up. And there's also wider cultural messages around get over it, move on. You should be
Mhm.
moving on. The fact is, we are continuing to be transformed in our lives and with our grief. And
Mm.
some small rituals, lighting a candle and looking at the
Mhm.
picture and talking to them,
Mhm.
saying happy birthday, pulling out the collections. My dad had sports cards, so he had, not
Yeah.
just baseball cards but other sports too. He had
Yeah.
trading cards, and a
Wow.
coin collection, and pictures, and remembering the things that my dad said to me that were really positive, and so
Wow.
just and talking about that with other people.
Mhm.
So at the time of my dad's death, as I said, I was a pastor and I had to kind of, squelch it. But during the time that I took off from the time with the congregation, so I did take a couple months off to finally, months later, begin to
Yes.
really heal. One of the things that happened was his birthday was coming around. And I said, we had a funeral, but that was a particular thing. I want to do something different. So one of the things I had that I also recommend for people is that I had a spiritual director. So I was also processing my grief with a spiritual director.
Oh.
And I was talking about that, and together we came up with an idea, and I called it a toast to Ted. My dad's name was Ted Farrar. So a toast to Ted. So I invited my friends to say it's the anniversary of my dad's birth. He just died and I want to do something very different. So we're going to have a toast to Ted. And so he was a sports lover and he liked to play pool. And there was a sports bar that I went to with friends where they had a lot of pool tables and we're always playing sports. And I was like, let's meet there. So I invited a bunch of my friends. We're going to have a toast to Ted. Another thing that my dad liked was dirty jokes. I told all my friends, bring a dirty joke. We're going to have a toast to Ted and we're going to tell dirty jokes. Yes, I am still Reverend Angela, but I'm like, we're going to tell dirty jokes, okay? Because that's the best way to remember my father is to be in an environment that he would have enjoyed
Mm.
and to
Funny.
share memories and laugh and tell dirty jokes. And so to have a ritual that reflects, if it's not
Mm.
already been done, at any time you can have a ritual that reflects that person's
Mm.
interest or humor or whatever and say we're gonna do something on their birthday. And I treasure that memory of the toast for Ted. I had 18 friends
Oh.
show up. I had 18
Mhm.
friends show up. Oh, it was so good. It was so healing for me because I had community and I had laughter. I
Oh.
had a way to genuinely, because the funeral does something for us. We needed the funeral.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I felt like there's something else that I feel like
Yeah.
I need. Another way to honor him, to remember him,
Yeah.
enjoy. We did a
Mm.
toast to Ted.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
I love all these ideas of like rituals because I think that that is just something that grief can be so overwhelming. And then you're just kind of, when you're hit by the initial loss, you are going day to hour by
Mm-hmm.
hour, day by
Mm-hmm.
day, like
Yes.
minute by minute. And then there is like, you lose a sense of time, a sense of like being in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And then when
Mm-hmm.
you kind of like
Yeah.
remember that you are in the world and there are
Mm-hmm.
cyclical things and there's seasons and things
Mm-hmm.
that come up,
Mm-hmm.
then you're like, huh, well, this is coming around again.
Right.
And then,
Right.
like, how do I deal with it? And
Mm-hmm.
these are really good ideas around like rituals and ways of honoring and
Mm-hmm.
holding and processing grief
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for people.
Thank you. Yes, these were really important. Again, to keep journaling, to keep talking with
Mhm.
people, to say the names was really important to me. And
Mm.
I there were people that I knew, like there were a couple new friends that I knew weren't comfortable, but I was just like, I'm sorry, but I just have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just kind of brought my new friend along. So
And then people learn though, like
that's
people
right.
learn how
That's
to
right.
like
That's right.
talk about grief or hold grief
Right.
differently, even
Right.
if it like it's something where not talking about it makes it uncomfortable because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, we don't have a blueprint. We have blueprints for talking about births, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have we
Mm-hmm.
have lots of blueprints of like, oh, this person's having a baby or like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
let's celebrate, but we don't really
Mm-hmm.
have like the same thing kind of
Yeah.
like on the other end of life. And being able to create rituals or
Mm-hmm.
ways of remembering and saying the
Mm-hmm.
names, I think that that's also it's funny as you're saying these things, I'm like, this is so biblical, like I'm like, people talk about the well of Jacob. Oh yeah, like our forefather Jacob, at
Right.
the well,
At the well.
and like people are like saying the names and saying genealogies and all
Yes.
these things that are like
Mm-hmm.
in their oral history and
Mm-hmm.
being able to iterate
Mm-hmm.
that, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
sort of like lost some of that oral
Yes.
history piece,
Right.
right? But
Right.
like
Mm-hmm.
that has been around for
Mm-hmm. That has
centuries,
been
right?
around
Uh,
for centuries.
mhm,
Exactly. Exactly.
right.
Centuries and millennia. This has been around. Also, another thing that I want to lift up too is that being a hospice social worker was really important too because,
Mhm.
and this is where clergy comes in. So clergy's grieving their own losses. So I talked about
Yeah.
my own grief and my own loss, but they're
Mm.
also grieving the losses of important people in their faith community, people
Mm.
that they have had crucial conversations with, people that worked beside them, let's say at the food bank, and
Mhm.
so clergy's also grieving the loss of congregation members. But again, you still have to serve the people and kind of hold up this image that I thought that's really not fair to even the community, including the pastor that has served these folks, that they don't get to
Mm.
say, hey, I really miss brother so and so. We did
Mhm.
these things together. So every time I think about blank or go to this place, I remember them. Like
Mhm.
it seems like clergy can't do that. So in hospice,
Yeah.
I learned that, of course, we're losing people all the time. And sometimes we lose a patient very quickly, but many times we develop this relationship with the patient and their family over months. And then
Mm.
they do die. And in hospice, part of what the interdisciplinary team does is that every week they have a time of remembrance for the patients that they've lost that week.
Wow.
Every
Amazing.
week.
Yeah.
Now, and so it was including saying the names and sharing a small ritual or sharing a memory of
Yeah.
something you learned from that patient and or their family. And so
Mm.
it was in hospice that I learned professionals need to mourn too and have a process. Too bad clergy doesn't.
Mhm.
Too
Yeah.
bad clergy doesn't necessarily sit with each other and say, I was just hit with yet another death in my congregation. And it's
Yeah.
not just the loss of a ministry that person spearheaded, it's also the loss of a person I was close to and talked about
Mhm.
God with and had impactful conversations with. And, so in hospice, I learned that whether it was a quick loss or a long-term loss, we recognized all of them. Because as
Mhm.
professionals, we would burn out if we didn't. Guess
Wow.
what? Clergy is overtaxed. There's too many duties. They are basically on call 24/7
Yeah.
unless that they're a big enough church to have a bigger staff. but they're basically on call for people's distresses 24/7. It's still expected to be perfect, to never look too worn out, to never complain, because God is good all the time. All the time, God is good, right? And so I recognize that clergy also, part of their burnout, some surveys were taken in these recent years, and even through COVID and all the deaths, like here's the ticket to clergy burnout. Too much to do, too much responsibility and not enough time to do it, and the inability to have work-life balance because you're on all the time, but also grief, their unexpressed grief, their compounded grief, more and more over and over. Being present to folks who die and not processing it leads to clergy burnout. It's really important that this is a community of people that cares for others and they're not cared for in that way. And it's leading to clergy burnout.
Yeah, that's so significant. I mean, I think that that's such a good point. I'm hearing that hospice, even what's the rituals that are created in hospice, could really, there could be a beautiful intersection of what's
Right.
learned in hospice with
Right.
like clergy, and actually like having a parent, my father, who works in hospice, and also is a chaplain and a pastor. Like, I'm familiar with, like, you have to be a clergy member to be in hospice as well, right? Or have a faith background, if they be a faith leader of some sort. And so, you know, it's interesting that that doesn't get like pivoted more so into faith communities or for clergy.
It's true. I mean, again, some of these silos, like
Yeah.
chaplains, don't necessarily like bring this back to their own faith communities. And I served
Yeah.
in a secular hospice. I served in a
Ah,
secular
okay.
hospice.
Got it.
We had chaplains
Yes, got
because
it.
that's part of the Medicare requirement for hospice is to have chaplains on staff. But we were a secular hospice, and so here we were, a secular hospice, having ritual and having
Good correction.
chaplains.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, and having ways to address grief in a way that acknowledged our grief too, so that we could continue to go back to the work and keep caring for more patients and families. We had to have a time in our own meeting to come together, to share stories, and to have small rituals, and to acknowledge our own losses and the pain of like caring for someone and then they're gone and have to still keep going. How do we do that without a ritual? How do we do that without supporting each other and having community that way? But too often clergy isolation is another, a sense of loneliness in the ministry is also a ticket to burnout. This is not okay.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is not okay.
I'm wondering, like, what you feel is needed for clergy now who might feel isolated. Like, maybe what are some words that they might need, but also what are some rituals that they might need, or how might it be maybe not upon the clergy themselves, but on the people who support the clergy? Maybe it's on their congregation, right? Or their friends. How might those people pour into clergy in a specific way? Like, what are some things that could be helpful or recognize?
I guess one thing that could be helpful is to not pathologize grief in general, to give that pastor a Sabbath day, because often, even I would say to them, I would tell my congregation, here's my Sabbath. Let the pastor have their Sabbath, please. It's not going to be Sunday, but they still need a day. So let the pastor have their Sabbath. Don't expect them to be without their own grief experience. Like allow them to talk about their grief experience, including the grief around them in terms of how it's impacting them, that there's multiple losses happening in the congregation. And again, maybe just since I did an education for a congregation, I think churches need to be educated on this and to not go to platitudes, but go to reality, because people will come to their own meaning about the death in their own time. The platitudes are rushing people, including the clergy. Give them time. Don't give them platitudes, give them presence. Give them the ministry of presence to just be present and to listen and to not try to fix it. It's what chaplains do. It's what chaplains are trained to do, but too many church pastors are told that they have to fix it, and that's a burden. That's unrealistic. It's one of the reasons why I was very much about, I'm mad, sad, or numb today, because I wasn't going to fake it. I wanted to model that. I'm not faking it. Here's how I'm feeling today in my grief. I didn't give platitudes when Kelsey, age 7, died. It was, I don't know what God is doing. I just know that I need us to be together and for us to celebrate Kelsey's life. And I needed to be mad at God in my journal. So where can clergy even have complicated feelings about God? There's not very many places. They certainly are not expected to have them with their congregations. And so there's other leadership in certain denominations where those folks, are supposed to be ministering to the ministers. Where are those folks? Is that happening? I don't know. In some denominations, it may be happening better than others. But in some cases, there are people who are designated to minister to the ministers.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think actually it really speaks to denominations, but also speaks to kind of your earlier identity that you said of being a Black woman pastor for a predominantly white European American church.
Yes.
And how the culture is influential in even addressing grief and how we even talk about grief or process grief.
Right.
And there are other cultures, especially cultures even of the global majority, where grief might look differently and supporting your faith leaders looks differently. And even not having that maybe hierarchical structure in the same way. Maybe it is actually the clergy are more on a level playing field, so that there is an approach, there is not that clergy people aren't approachable, but that there is this sort of well, you support us, but we also need to support you in the same in the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it just took a while for my congregation to come around to figure out that what I needed was time away. It just took some time, but I do think there was a cultural piece in that too. I do think there was a cultural piece in that.
That's huge.
In that I wanted more talk and more ritual and more acknowledgement, and they were like, well, no, but we need you to be the pastor, and we don't want to keep talking about this loss. We don't want to keep talking about our losses. We want to appear to be moving on. And I'm like, guess what? It's not really happening. The reality is that grief stays with you. It just changes. It changes your life. It changes you. With every milestone, I talk about this with folks who are grieving and other people who will listen.
Yes.
At every milestone, your grief is going to come up, because what would that person be thinking? I wish that person were here. That person would have helped me with this particular milestone or life challenge I'm experiencing. Here we are again. And we're growing, and we are still inspired by our beloveds who have passed on and died. But it takes time and it takes community to kind of be like, oh, yes, so I don't have to put it away.
Yeah.
I don't have to pretend it's not happening, or that it's not changing me and changing my life and I'm not transformed by it. I think that culturally, again, African heritage people, African American folks understand things like genealogies and understand that there is a legacy that we should be embracing from our ancestors and our elders, and that we continue to draw on that. We continue to tell stories about the civil rights movement for a reason. We still need that inspiration. We still need that wisdom. I feel like, again, in a wider culture that's more about moving forward than about learning from the past. It's more about looking forward. And so I think that culturally, something that I would hope is that, again, that we listen to the wisdom of the people of the global majority who are able to hold multiple points in time with grace. The past that is still here, and the loved ones who have died but are still here, the present, and the hopeful future. People of the global majority can be in different time all at once in a way that Western culture does not.
It's interesting. I really felt, especially at still in my grief, but especially acutely, I really felt, and maybe it's my affinity for sci-fi, but I felt like a time traveler, right? In a lot of ways.
Yes.
I really felt grief transports you. And even like recently, as I was going through my mother's stuff and I was going through my grandmother's stuff and her mother's stuff, so I was going through my great
Yes.
grandmother's,
Ooh.
like, and finding like her marriage certificate, like
Yes.
signed in ink from
Yes.
Trinidad, I was like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, this
Ooh.
document, right? And I was like,
Yes.
I literally am time traveling as I am
Yes.
holding this document with their friends' names, who now I'm like, well, now I have to just look up who their friends are and who are they still around,
Yes.
and
Right.
it leads you down these different adventures and pathways
Yes.
and all these things, right? But
Right.
it's sort of like this acknowledgement also doesn't have to be only limited to something that is so bleak, but also can be something so beautiful and like, just deepens who your knowledge of who you are, and it
Right.
changes you in that way. Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I would say my healing encompasses just, I would say that as I think about what has helped me to heal, it's both the personal individual things and also the communal things. Some of them I
Mm.
just insisted upon. Like I said, I just insisted on talking about my grief
Yes.
and my loved ones. But I also had a toast to Ted. I
Yeah.
had a blue Christmas service at my church. Like, I think we need both. And that's what I encouraged when I was teaching this to a local congregation of, like, you're going to do some little rituals for yourself, but also you don't have to do it all alone. Like, how do you invite one another to support one another in your grief? That at one point you tell the stories, because the stories are the sources of joy and wisdom, not just the loss and the pain. The stories are also the sources of the joy
Yes.
and the
Yes.
wisdom. And yeah, telling dirty jokes was
Mhm. Part part of that, right? It's part of
remembering
interest and likes.
part
Yeah.
of interest and likes. Yeah, okay. But I say that to say that that we get to tell the whole truth, including how
Mhm.
complicated people were, because people were complicated in life. I believe it's healing to say they were complicated in their life, and in this continuing bond I have with them. Yeah, I still remember them as complicated and love them dearly. Like, they
That's
don't they don't
such a great, like, I just want to, like, that, highlight that, like, yeah, because there's just so much around, like, I think it's the same side of the coin of platitudes of, like, only remembering the
the
good
good.
of someone lost, when rather, like, people are much more nuanced and complicated and complex than that.
Right.
And that, yeah, telling the whole truth. Ooh.
Telling the whole truth. Now, again, I recognize not everybody's ready for that, and it's not for every audience. But I think, again, part of the healing for me, it was able to, like, I did my dad's eulogy too. I told the whole truth. I said it nicely.
You
I
can be
didn't,
respectful and also tell the whole truth.
and also tell the whole truth. That's
Yeah.
that's what I did. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I
yeah,
did.
yeah.
I could give pointers on that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
But one of the things that I said in his eulogy, I said, my dad, in his hope, kept trying at relationship. He was married many times and engaged at the time of his death. He didn't really understand relationship, but he tried, and we're telling the truth here. He wasn't Mother Teresa. He wasn't always good at relationship, but he kept trying. That's how I talked about the fact that he was many times married and
Mm.
engaged at the time of his death. Was he kept trying though.
Yeah. You just keep trying.
He kept trying.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
He believed in love.
Yeah. So there's that. Yeah.
A little humor is
Yeah.
medicine too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, right? Like, I think this is actually really beautiful to sort of like wrap up in and think about, but just like, I was going to ask you sort of like how grief and healing influenced or shaped your identities, if at all. And I know we started with like a very important, deep story about your family history and ending kind of in laughter and being like, people are complex, and like grief and healing, they change you and they change your identities. And so I'm curious
Yes.
for you, how have grief and
Yes.
healing influenced and shaped your identities? Yeah.
Well, as I've learned more as a human being who grieves, and also as a professional who supports people who are grieving, I identify myself now as a griever. I didn't always do that, but I'm always grieving somebody, my husband, my friend. My body's different on those birthdays and anniversary days. I'm like, oh, my body's still feeling it. So I'm still a griever. So it's changed my identity in that I recognize I continue to grieve, but I also take strength from those relationships that make me better in relationships going forward.
Mm, wow. Yes.
That's the transformative piece for me, is like, oh my gosh, those relationships were complicated and we were all stumbling through, and I'm learning better and better how to have relationship, how to be with people in whatever space they're in emotionally. I'm a griever always, and that means also that I'm always honoring my loved one and myself and
Mm.
taking those lessons forward. That's the transformation.
I'm glad to hear you include yourself in that too. Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, I just kind of want to end with this. I always end with the question of just like, what do you wish people knew about this topic? What do you wish you knew that you know now? But I want to slip in another question too of like, what do you wish people like? People might not have the words to ask you about your grief, even though we kind of say, like, ask us about our grief,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like, how do people do that? How do people do that respectfully? Like, what, as you had a script of something that you could say in response, I'm curious if you have like offerings or an idea of something that people could say and asking about grief in ways that like maybe clergy maybe needs to be asked.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm a big fan of saying, I wonder. So I'm thinking about, and I wonder. So I'm thinking about these holidays, let's say, or so and so's birthday coming up. I wonder if that's coming up for you. That's a very therapist-y way, of course, but we can all learn a little bit of therapist-y language around I wonder, or like I remember this about your loved one. I'm wondering whether you're remembering it too. I wonder how you are with blank now. I wonder if something has shifted for you in remembering your loved one now. I'm wondering.
Mm.
And then also with a caveat, you don't have to share. I'm just saying I'm open to hearing,
Yeah.
because people
Good.
may not be ready to share. But you don't have to, but I'm open.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point that some people might be like, I don't really feel
Don't
like
want to talk
sharing
about
right
it.
now.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But I think that it again destigmatizes the grief process, destigmatizes talking about grief, and also is curious, approaching a person with curiosity and care. Like, again, especially if you know something about them. I know today is your mother's birthday, for example. And,
Yeah.
and clergy may already have, maybe they've brought their mama to church, and
Yeah.
then, so the congregation knows them,
Right.
right? So
Right.
let's talk about it. How are
Mhm.
you doing with that right now, Pastor? I'm wondering, what do you need? I'm wondering how you're doing. You don't have to share, but just know I'm wondering, and I'm here if you want to talk.
Angela, thank you so much. There's so much like wisdom that just like flows from your experiences and also from what you have learned, lessons learned, and also your own transformation and the ways in which you have just held grief and healing and both of those things in tandem, but also the ways in which you now are able to talk about it and now are able to honor yourself as well as the people that have been lost as well. And so I just want to thank you so much. And as we wrap up, I'm wondering if our listeners, if they wanted to connect with you or just like maybe get into like your spiritual care practice or something like that, please let us know if that's okay with you. And also, like, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Well, the best place to connect with me is all my contact information is on eastsidetherapyassociates.com. All
Awesome.
one word,
Cool.
eastsidetherapyassociates.com. You'll see a profile of me among all the professionals there. You'll see a profile of me and all the contact information and the specialties I do.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much. We'll share that at the end of the show notes that appear with this episode. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Untethered to Rooted is produced and hosted by me, Dana Darty. Original music was composed and performed by the ever-talented Daniel Dickinson. Thanks so much to our guests for sharing with us today. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And follow us on social at Untethered to Rooted. And if you didn't like it, what podcast? Dana who? Until next time, take and give good care.